Good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Fisher from Cascade Rail Foundation. We present and preserve the Western history of the Milwaukee Road, featuring the great state of Washington. Today, our special guest is renowned Milwaukee Road historian, Alan Miller. And Alan has a really great program for us on the Milwaukee Road Cascade Highline. So I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to turn it over to Alan. And I hope everybody really enjoys this program. We'll do some questions and answers at the end of the presentation.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Jonathan. And my program today is going to be on the Milwaukee Road's Cascade Highline, also known as the Snoqualmie Highline. And this was their temporary line over Snoqualmie Pass before the completion of the Snoqualmie Tunnel. Now, Great Northern and Northern Pacific also had temporary lines over their respective passes, but they had to contend with switchbacks to overcome the steep grades, which are cumbersome and create bottlenecks because you got to break down the train into small pieces on one side and reassemble it on the other side. Plus, switchbacks are dangerous because they're generally fairly steep grades. So the Milwaukee Road lucked out on their mountain crossing. They only had to contend with adverse grades. So the Highline Helper District was on the east side, was from Keechelus to Laconia, and that was 4.7 miles of 2.2% grade. And then on the west side, from Rockdale up to Snoqualmie Summit, was 4.4 miles of 2.75% grade. So the whole Highline District was 9.1 miles long. And this is Snoqualmie Summit on Tuesday, September 29th, 1908. And the occasion is they're laying rail over the summit. This crew started out in Ellensburg and laid rail all the way up here to the summit. Then another crew took over from here and laid rail down the west side of Snoqualmie Pass. And they reached a location called Topographer's Gulch 1 month later on October 29th. Now, the trains look like ballast trains to me. They got these dump cars. And so I'm not sure where exactly the rail train is. But I wanted to call attention to this strange looking caboose, I guess it is. But it's got these pillars on the roof with a beam across it. And I know the Milwaukee Road had a fleet of boxcar cabooses that had a bench on the roof for observation purposes. But the pictures of the few I've seen don't look anything like this. So I'm not sure what this car is. I bring it to your attention because we're going to see either it or another similar one later in the program. And this is along the shore of Lake Keechelus. And this is either late 1911 or early 1912. I can kind of date the picture because of the automatic block signal that we see here. This is particular one is number 25/1, but the automatic block was installed between Clallam and Keechelus in October of 1911. The location here is we're 1 mile east of the Keechelus snowshed. And in the distance, I can see Guy Peak and Snoqualmie Mountain there. And here we are at the east end of the Keechelus snow sheds. This was the longest shed on the whole Milwaukee system. And some of you older viewers might recall driving on Interstate 90 on the other side of the lake and being able to look over here and see this big long snow shed on the railroad grade here. And then the sign tells us that we're 1 mile from Keechelus Station. And this is at the west end of the Keechelus snow sheds. We're witnessing a meet here. I pretty much believe that this photo was taken off the rear platform of a westbound train that has just met this eastbound that's sitting in the Keechelus siding here. And that's the Keechelus snow shed in the distance. And this automatic block signal here is in the position of raising up to a vertical position, and that will give this train a clear block to proceed. This is taken up on the High Line, looking down at the Keechelus snow sheds right there. And I can see some smoke and steam on the other side there. So this looks like a setting up for a Keechelus meet with this train that they took the pictures from. And this is a Keechelus station. It wasn't very pretentious. The Milwaukee Road used a lot of these portable Class D depots. This particular one was 12 by 36 feet and divided into 3 rooms. It had a 12 by 12 freight room on the end there. In the center was the agent's office, and on this end was the passenger's waiting room. And this particular depot, when the High Line was abandoned, was moved to Falls City on the Everett Branch. Now the house there in the background, that was a standard Milwaukee Road 2-story section foreman's house. But in this case, it's been built here for the agent and his family to live in. The earliest agent here was a guy named Charlie Reynolds, and he had a wife named Addie and a son named Vernon. And his son was only about 15 years old, but he could telegraph, and he often sat in and replaced some of the telegraphers when they were sick or couldn't come to work. The building on the right here, I believe, is a bunkhouse. On the occasions when they did have night operators working here, that was their living quarters. And this is a 12-car excursion train from Tacoma. And I believe this to be the machinist picnic that was run on August 20th, 1911. And I don't know who the young ladies are, but this guy is the engineer. He's Jimmy Washburn. And the fireman is Jerry Dixon. And Jerry was a Washington State Senator for a brief time, so he carried the nickname Senator the rest of his railroad career. The 3017 is an F4 class Pacific locomotive, and its regular assignment was on the Columbian passenger train. In the distance here, we can see the Keechelus depot and the train order signal and the agent's house. And then we see some excursionists picnicking up on the stumps there on the hillside. And Keechelus started to develop into quite the tourist spot for affluent people from Tacoma and Seattle. And so the Milwaukee Road kind of capitalized on that and started running ads like this one here for little weekend excursion fairs to Keechelus. This particular ad ran in the Ellensburg Capitol on June 27th, 1912. Also, the station agent, Charlie Reynolds, he bought some boats and some tents, and he would rent this stuff out to these excursionists or whatever that came up here to camp out on the lake and enjoy the fishing and just the beauty of the mountains up here. And this is the same excursion train here. It's they turned the locomotive now and coupled onto the other end of the train, and so they're just waiting now for the excursionists to have their fun and come back to the train and return to Tacoma. And this is just a crop of that picture there showing the crowd at the depot. And this depot was pretty inadequate for these large crowds that were starting to come up here now. So Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound President H.R. Williams decided that Keechelus needed a bigger depot to handle these crowds. And he wanted to do it in style. So he proposed a log depot be built here for this purposes. And so this here is the plan that they agreed on from some choices that they had from different plans. This is the one that they were going to use, and it was elevated 8 feet into the hillside, and they elevated it to try and get up out of the deep snow. But they wanted the freight and baggage room to be as inconspicuous as possible. So they built it down at ground level and then put a flatter roof on it. And they approved an AFE for it of $3,000, but it had a notation on it that it was in 1912, and they said it was so late in the year that there was no work to be done on this unless it was desirable to get the logs out during the winter. And this is the floor plan that they were going to use. They agreed on separate men's and women's waiting rooms because there was some loggers, miners, and other rough characters up in this neck of the woods that they weren't sure would mix well with the first class people. And then you got your agent's office in the middle there with a ticket window in the back. And then the freight and baggage room. I saw a notation that because this is going to be first class people coming up here, that the depot should include interior bathrooms. So had this been built, they probably would have put a log addition on the back here with the bathrooms in it. It kept getting deferred though. Like I say, in 1912, it was too late into the winter months when it got approved. By 1913, the Milwaukee was only approving necessary jobs. So it got put on the back burner for that year. In 1914, they were getting close to completing the Snoqualmie Tunnel. And so that was going to involve a line change at Keechelus. So they were holding off on building the depot until they knew where the permanent line was going to be. And then later in the year, the U.S. Reclamation Service arrived there to start building a dam on Lake Keechelus to turn it into a reservoir for irrigation purposes in the Yakima River. And that dam was going to flood the lake, and that was going to ruin the beach. They had a nice beach down there with a dance pavilion on it. Even Charlie Reynolds, the agent, would provide music for dances down there and stuff. But the raising of the lake was going to ruin the tourist business, so that was going to put an end to that. So the depot never got built. But Keechelus was first and foremost a helper station. And so here we see a Malley helper sitting across from the Keechelus depot. Here's the depot platform here. And they're sitting on the passing track. And this track over here was a 700-foot long spur track. And this is a Malley. And they would back down from Laconia all the way down here to Keechelus to help both eastbound, or both passenger and freight westbound trains up to the summit. And this particular engine is the 5018, which was either on this job a long time or all the photographers caught it, because we're going to see a few more pictures of it as we go. It's a class N1 2662 compound Malley. And the compound Malleys took steam directly from the steam dome into the high pressure cylinders on the rear. And then it was exhausted into the low pressure cylinders on the front. And by the time it came out of the exhaust, it was so saturated that it would come down on the cab like rain. So the engineers nicknamed these slobber stacks. Now, they had a tragedy up here on August 12th, 1912. The westbound Olympian train number 15 had a helper engine on the point. He had an F4 class Pacific number 3013 was the road engine. And then the helper was a K1 class Prairie number 2142. And they came into the curve just west of the Keechelus depot a little too fast. And when they came onto bridge FF42, which was over Cold Creek, the tender on the helper engine derailed and bunched the ties up, and the road engine got derailed off of the bridge by those ties. And when he landed down in the creek, the engine rolled over against the bridge, knocked the bridge down, and then that brought the helper engine down into the creek bed. And that accident killed both engine crews. The engineer and firemen on both engines were killed instantly. The engineer on the road engine was Henry Noble. And Henry Noble was the #1 engineer in seniority on the Coast Division. And in fact, a couple of years earlier in 1910, they renamed a siding that was just east of Maple Valley called Dryden. They renamed it Noble in his honor. And he had the honor of taking the first passenger train out of Seattle. And he went as far as Cleellum, where then he swapped trains and brought the first passenger train into Seattle. And whenever they had railroad president special trains and things like that, Hank Noble was usually selected to be the engineer on those special trains. So it was quite the tragedy to lose him. There was one passenger killed. She was in the lavatory of one of the cars that got telescoped. And this is probably something that should save for a story for another day, because I have a lot of photographs of this wreck. There was about 3 photographers that came up here and took pictures of it, and they were even selling copies of the photos in the Cedar Falls Depot for 35 cents a piece. And then they filmed movie footage of this wreck, and that was shown in theaters all over the country by the Animated Weekly Company. Here we see Hank Noble's boiler being yarded up the hill to be shipped to Tacoma shops for rebuilding. And his locomotive, the 3013, because of that, there was some talk about a hoodooed engine, and that's why the wreck and stuff. But I don't know. Hank Noble picked that engine himself. This was back in the days when the Milwaukee Road assigned locomotives to engineers, and so that was his baby. And here's a publicity photo of 3 guys up on a rock. And it says, this gigantic rock was blown out during construction of Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound Railway near Easton, Washington. And of course, Easton was just the nearest identifiable location, but this is really on the high line between Keechelus and Laconia. And this is a view looking up Gold Creek Valley, and I believe this is the rock that those guys were sitting on. And this is the old High Line, but today this is a gravel road. You can you can actually drive on this section here. Now, when the tunnel line goes in, it's going to be right down in these trees down here. Somewhere along here will be the east end of the Hayek yard. And there's a little further up the High Line. This is a bridge FF50 over Tunnel Creek. And I'm pretty sure this is the winter of 1912 and 13. They got a exceptionally heavy winter that year. And we can see the tip of Guy Peak here over the trees. And this is the same bridge with way freight number 92 crossing it. And here's a map of the High Line that we can kind of follow along. There's Keechelus right here, and the yellow is the High Line, the white is the tunnel line. And you'll notice another Keechelus down here. When the High Line was abandoned, then they abandoned this station of Keechelus, and they reestablished another Keechelus down here at the location of the Roaring Creek water tank. And it never had a sidetrack or anything. It was just a name, and they had a passenger shelter there for miners or loggers to flag the train if they wanted to ride it. The red here is the Keechelus snow sheds. And move on up the line here. And here we see the east end of the Hayek yard, and somewhere in this vicinity is where I think that big rock was. And then you got the Milwaukee Ski Lodge, the famous Milwaukee Ski Bowl, and then the west end of Hayek, and then through the tunnel to Rockdale. And then the High Line goes over the tunnel, continues north, goes up over Snoqualmie Pass to the station of Laconia. And then from here, it's all downgrade up around this big loop and down to Rockdale. And roughly from here to Rockdale, the roadbed is literally just carved out on a shelf of the mountainside. And then they connect back to the permanent main line here. And then this is Humpback Creek here, where the Humpback Creek snow shed is. There's still a portion of that snow shed left on the Palouse to Cascades Trail. And this is the east switch at Laconia. And we've got a meet going on here. Way freight number 92 is holding the main line. His power is an L1 glass Mikado. And it's number 2500, which was the first Mikado built for the Milwaukee. And we can see he's got a Chicago Milwaukee Puget Sound boxcar in his train. And we can see that he is meeting a freight train that's going in on the passing track here. And this picture was taken April 14th, 1910. But I know it's a early picture because there's no automatic block signals at the head block down here yet. And this is again the east switch at Laconia, and this is they got the automatic block signals in now. This particular one here is number 31/3, and in the background you can see Guy Peak and the Snoqualmie Mountain. And this is the eastbound Olympian train number 16 posed here. This is an Ash of Curtis photo. And so he's posed here for publicity photo. And the standard consist on the Olympian in those days was a combination mail and express car, a baggage car, a day coach, a tourist car, a dining car, 2 standard sleeping cars, and an observation car. So it was an 8-car consist. And then we have a artist did a colorized version of that picture. He added a 9th car on the rear. but he painted the cars in Pullman green. So to me, this looks more like a Great Northern train than a Milwaukee road. And but if that isn't confusing enough, then we have this picture, which looks like the same train we just saw 2 frames ago, but now he's got another train behind him, and the ground's all covered with snow. This mountain range up here looks to me like it was cut out with an X-Acto knife, overlaid. So I don't know, maybe Photoshop isn't as new as we think it is. But if we want to add to the confusion, now they've electrified trolley poles, catenary, a couple of box cab motors on the head end. They got the train the right color now, but they still got that ninth car on the end. But this was put out to publicize the coming of the electrification on the Milwaukee Road. But photos like this have spawned the rumors that, yeah, they electrified the Highline. I saw pictures of it. And then if you want to rub salt in the wounds, we got a bipolar up at Laconia. And they've got the backgrounds backwards here. The Guy Peak should be over here and Snoqualmie Mountain on that side, but that's the privileges of the publicity department. Now here's a map of Laconia. We can kind of get an idea what the layout was here. This is the east switch where we just saw all that action at. There was a crude wagon road over Snoqualmie Pass then, and it crossed over the Milwaukee at this point. And then up here we got the depot, water tank, the engineman's bunkhouse, and then what was known as Holden's Hotel was ran by a guy named J. Paul Holden. But this was mainly the beanery here where train crews could get something to eat any time of day or night. And a couple of company houses here that I think ended up belonging to the Forest Service. And then your engine facilities here. They had a 14 by 60-foot shed here that they could spot tank cars and bunker sea oil in to unload, and they covered it so they could unload them in the wintertime with all the snow. And then you had an open air shed here for servicing the helper engine up here. And then you had a turntable lead that went into a covered turntable. And to turn the locomotives, they would hook up to the air line on the locomotive, and that would power a motor that would turn the turntable. So it wasn't a Armstrong type turntable where you had to push and push. And they had two passing tracks here, an eastbound passing track and a westbound pass. And this is the west switch. And then line continued up here, actually down, or going downgrade now, over Commonwealth Creek. And then up here they crossed the south fork of the Snoqualmie River twice, once on that bridge and once on this one. And the line continued on down to Rockdale. And this is the earliest picture I've been able to find of Laconia. And I believe this is the winter of 1908, 1909. And I think they're up here trying to get as much as they can done before winter drives them out. They haven't built the water tank yet. It would be sitting right in this area here. And this is the Beanery, Holden's Hotel. And then while we have a train order, good view of a train order signal here, I thought I'd explain Milwaukee Road train order, semaphore train order signals. Milwaukee cast these themselves in the Milwaukee shops, and they were rather unique in that most train order signals had the lantern on the top here, and so both sides were the same. They worked off the same point. Milwaukee train order signals had the lantern on the side, so these two faces had to be different. But the main thing was that they're both in a stop position, so you had a red lens in this spectacle here. The center one was blanked out, it just had a piece of metal in there. And then the clear position was just a white light, so there was no glass in these. They're just a blank hole. So to equip a Milwaukee train order signal, you just had to have two pieces of red lens, and they just worked in two positions. Now, in 1920, when the Form 19 train orders started to be used, then they put a green lens in the center one, and then they rigged these things to operate in three positions. I'm a train order nut, so I had to put that in. There's your standard Milwaukee Road switch target. And the depot here was what they call a Class C telegraph office. It was just a 9-foot by 10-foot operator shack with a stove and a desk in there and not much else. But I wanted to bring attention to this car. This is another one of those hokey looking caboose cars, I guess. It's got the two pillars here with a beam across it and these white targets. But that beam doesn't look like something you could comfortably sit on. So I really don't know what this car was for. And then over here you got these outfit cars with the snow fences on the roof to keep the snow, I guess, from building up in the entryways. And this is what the engineer's view of Laconia as you're coming into it. And we got a bunch of cabooses here. The bunkhouse up here was strictly for the engineer and firemen to batch in. And the trainmen, the conductors and brakemen, they were expected to live in their cabooses. Here we have a boxcar caboose that's probably got a bench up on the roof. And then you got two cupola cabooses and a gondola, and then two more cupola cabooses, and then what looks like a rotary plow down here. Now, the gondola was a kind of a standard practice when you're living in the caboose, rather than have to get out at night in the snow and go hunt down the nearest outhouse. They would spot a gondola in Caboose Row for devious purposes. And this is the other end of that line of cabooses. And you can see this one here, he boarded up the windows. He probably had the windows blown out by a rotary plow before, so he's not taking any chances this time. And we see that is a rotary plow there. Then we got Denny Peak in the background. And then we got a K1 class Prairie engine here, the 5512. And then you can get a view here right through the turntable. You can see the snow on the other side of it. And this is Laconia in the summer of 1910. So here we have the engineer's bunkhouse, and then Holden's Hotel, and a water closet there. And then we got a helper up from Moncton, which is later became Cedar Falls. And he's probably just helped the train up the hill here. And so now he's up here at the depot to get his train orders to run light back down to Moncton. He's got his white extra flags on here. And the engineer on this engine was John Bain, and the fireman was Harley Manning. And here's the little Class C depot with the Wells Fargo Express sign on it. And then your coal and oil house. And this contained coal for heating for the stoves to heat these buildings. And then it contained kerosene for the lamps and lanterns and And kerosene was also known as coal oil, and it was used to start the fires in the coal stoves. And then this is the agent's house behind the depot here. And the first agent up here was a guy named Claire Eugene Ingraham, and his wife's name was Welfa Adelia Ingraham, but she went by Peggy. And they were the day and night operators up here. He worked a 12-hour day shift, and she worked a 12-hour night shift. After 1911, the hours of service law went in, and they had to put on a third operator, and so that gave them all each a 8-hour shift. And here's the shed here for unloading the oil cars. And this is the sand house. This is the open air shed for servicing the locomotives. This is your coaling tower here. And then a covered turntable with the exhaust stack. And then the water tank there. And this is taken in 1971 from approximately the same location. And Milwaukee Road's Highline ran right down the middle of this highway. And this is the following summer, the summer of 1911. And I've got a good view of Denny Peak here. I can recall seeing the remains of an airplane on the side of this that you can see from I-90, where apparently somebody flew right into the side of the mountain. But there's a couple of changes up here now. We've got the oil service tank, steel service tank to hold bunker C oil, and it's mounted on a concrete pedestal. And then they've gotten a bigger depot here. They got a Class D portable depot set in here now. See the Wells Fargo sign on it and the Continental Telegraph sign. So the operators have a little more roomier quarters. And this is a helper engine up from Moncton in 1910. It's engine number 2080. And this is a K-class Prairie engine. And Milwaukee Road bought a huge fleet of these locomotives because this was going to be the locomotive that they were going to equip their new Western extension with. And they had no mountain experience, so once they started getting into heavy grades, they soon realized why these locomotives were called prairies. And so they had to then start buying Mikados and eventually Malley locomotives to work in the mountain districts. And the reason I know this engine has come up from Cedar Falls is because it has a flanger blade mounted on the pilot here. The Cedar Falls passenger helper did double duty by flanging the track and helping trains up and down the grades. This engineer, William W. Collins, I was able to find him on a seniority roster, and he had a June 28, 1910 seniority date. I couldn't find V. Russell on any roster I had, so I'm assuming he either left railroad service or he got killed in a wreck. This is a more traditional helper for the passenger trains, L1 class Mikado. This is number 2509. And again, we know it came up from Cedar Falls because it's got the flanger mounted on the pilot. And the engineer could raise and lower this from the cab. And the engineer is John Bain here. And then this is engineer George Shoemaker, who was engineer on a Valley helper up here. But back in Sioux City, South Dakota, or Sioux City, Iowa, where these guys were from before they came west, George was John's fireman. And John's son, George Bain, when he was little, he used to call him Dad's redheaded fireman. And John didn't have very kind words for this particular locomotive. He said that 2509 was the worst engine in the back. And he called her an old cow that couldn't keep out of her own way. And this is George Shoemaker on his Malley, proud man on his engine. And here's some more Malleys here. They had one Malley engine up here and two crews for helpers so that they could keep a Malley helper in service 24 hours. And this is the 5018 again. And again, we got another coal and oil house over here, and then the steel service tank. And then there's a L1 class Mike over here, 2510. And he is probably just turned his train on or his engine on the turntable. He's headed the Cedar Falls direction. And this is a 5018 again. This time we have a tank car here, and that one that before they got the oil plant installed here, they used to pump bunker C oil directly out of these tank cars to fuel locomotives. And another Malley at the Laconia water tank, and there's a little bit of a Milwaukee switch target there. And this is John Fox and Tom Veal. They were early day helper engineers up here at Laconia. And this is an early Malley. He's got a low number of 5005. And I see another Malley in the background here facing the other direction, and that is probably a freight helper from Cedar Falls. The way they worked it is they would put the L1 class helpers on the passenger train, and that was enough to get them all the way up here to Laconia. But on freight trains, they would generally get a Malley helper at Cedar Falls, and then when they got to Rockdale, then another Malley here from Laconia would back down, and they would use 3 engines to get up the hill. I believe they put 2 on the point, and then I think the Laconia helper was on the rear shoving. And these 2 men here are probably these guys' firemen. And here we see the eastbound Olympian coming into Laconia Yard with its L1 helper on the point. And this is a 8503, so this is after 1912 when they renumbered the locomotives. It was in the 2500 series. And here's the train again, and they're about to cut the helper off here, and he'll run up here, and this guy will line the switch, and he'll get in on the turntable lead out of the way, and then the Olympian can continue on eastward. And they had a 440 American class up here working on a work train, 1356. There was only 5 of these that came west that I'm aware of. Anyway, they posted up here for a picture of the old and the new, or the big and the little. And this is Laconia, and this is either the late winter or early spring of 1910. And you can see how dirty the snow is. Lets you know that it's late winter. There's the Engineman's bunkhouse and Holden's Hotel again. And there's the water closet. And we see still have the little Class C telegraph office for a depot. This is the roof of the coal and oil house. And then the agent's living quarters. And I could see Peggy's got her laundry all hanging out here. And there's a couple of galvanized wash tubs hanging on the wall. And there's a train in the yard. You can see the headlight right there. And then the sun must have just came out because you got steam rolling off the roof of the water tank. And in the winter of 1910, 1911, they transitioned the depots up here. And so this little Class C telegraph office got turned 90 degrees, and then they set a Class D portable depot in here. This particular one measured 12 by 28, and I believe it was divided in just 2 rooms, a office for the operators and then a waiting room. And this picture, I believe, was taken right after the move here, because the train order signal doesn't have any rods coming down to control the arms. The arms are just set in a semi-permanent stop position both ways. And there's no bell crank down here with the rods going into the building or anything like that. So this picture is taken just after the transfer, the move. And then I see a locomotive headlight over here that must be used to light that path at night. Here's a better view of the depot. And Continental Telegraph Company was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Milwaukee Road. Rather than contract with Western Union, they made their own telegraph company. And then they did contract with Wells Fargo for Express. And your coal and oil house again. Then they got the Dietz platform lamps here on posts. And this depot here, when the Highline was abandoned, they put it on a flat car and they hauled it down south of Tacoma, and it became the depot at Frederickson to replace the depot that had burned up down there. The occasion here is this is the winter of 1912, 1913, and they had so much snow up here that it took out the automatic block system and took out the communication lines. So the Milwaukee put a call out for linemen and signal maintainers from other divisions to come up here and help. So you see all these guys here with the bedrolls and stuff. And I think this is a mail sack. It's stenciled Laconia wash. And I know there was no post office up here. They used to get the mail in down at Moncton, and then they'd bring the mail up on the helper engines. And here's the depot again, the same crowd of men that are going to be earning their pay up here. They've got a tough job ahead of them. And this is a poor picture, but it's one of only 2 that I've seen that shows the engine facilities up here. And here's your steel service tank. And then here's the oil column here where the locomotives would fuel up. And then this is your 14 by 60 oil unloading shed, and the sand house here, and then the coaling tower, your open air shed for service, and then the covered turntable in the background. And you might say, well, if they're burning oil, why do they still have a coal tower here? And that was for the rotary plows. They never converted the rotaries over to oil because there wasn't any danger of them setting a forest fire when they're up here plowing snow. And this is the other picture of the engine facility. It's not very good either, but they're better than nothing at all. And looks like we're getting ready for winter here. There's a 14 by 60 oil shed. Got a rotary on the maintenance track here, and then a 5512 K1 Prairie on the turntable lead. This guy looks like he drew the short straw to have to crawl down and hook up the air hoses and stuff. I don't recognize anybody in this photograph except this guy right here, the conductor R.R. Gardner. And this is the 9-day plowing expedition in the winter of 1908, 1909. Milwaukee Road allowed Snoqualmie Pass to just snow over. So they didn't run any trains between Easton and Ragnar over the pass all winter. And so now on March 26th, 1909, spring has come and they want to get the line open. So they assembled this plow train at Ellensburg to open the line up. They had a G class 460, number 26 was a point engine, and a rotary plow. And they hit an average of 8 feet of snow over the pass, but it had a lot of it had solid ice at the bottom where the snow had melted and then refroze. And there was no water tanks or cold facilities en route, so they had to haul all their own stuff. So you got water, you got tubs of water here, and then you got cars of coal, and then they got a bunch of outfit cars here to house all the laborers that they brought along with them. And this plowing expedition took 9 days. They finally broke through on the other side on Sunday, April the 4th. And here's the plow at Whittier. And then here they are plowing across the Cold Creek Bridge. And this is the same bridge that collapsed under the Olympian in 1912. And written on the back of this, it said, this is a trail to the operator's shack at Laconia. But on the front, it just says trail cut through 20 feet of snow at Laconia. And this here is the winter of 1909, 1910. And this was their first winter of operations for the Milwaukee Road. And what a winter it was. They had a lot of snow up here. In fact, I'll give you a few facts. They had a total of 134 inches of snow on the ground at Laconia on February the 28th, 1910. They had 10.75 feet of snow fell in 3 days between February 24th and 26th. They had 10 inches of snow that fell on March 1st. And now March 1st was the same day as the Wellington Avalanche over on Stevens Pass on the Great Northern. They had a total snowfall for the month of February was 252 inches, which is 21 feet. They had 6 feet of snow fell in one storm, and the temperature dropped to 10 degrees, and they had strong east winds through the pass. So for 1910, the total snowfall up here was 46 feet. And we got a G class 460 locomotive here. And then a little caboose here. This caboose almost looks small enough to be a four-wheel bobber, which the Milwaukee Road had some of those, but I don't know of any that came west. So it might just be an illusion that it looks shorter than it is, but it is rare because it has a center cupola, which the Milwaukee didn't have very many of those. And then these two cars here, I believe these are business cars. I think we have officials up here trying to help unsnarl this snowy mess, their first experience in winter mountain railroading. And here we have a double rotary, which the Milwaukee Road called a bull moose. And I know this is an early one because they've got two K1 class prairies for pushing power. And you'll notice that they got canvas tarps on all the tenders, and that was to keep the coal dry while they were plowing so it didn't get wet and freeze into solid chunks. And this is rotary number 20 here, which was a very early rotary that the Milwaukee bought and was a fixture up here for a long time. They call them rotary snow shovels. And the one on the other end is most likely the number 14. But they had two sets of these plows up here every winter. And one of them worked the west slope down to Cedar Falls, which is 24 miles of all mountain grade. And then the other plow set worked on the east side to Cleellum, and that was 31 miles of the snow district. And I assume that this is the entire crew that it takes to run a double rotary plow. Each plow took two engineers. One engineer ran the wheel, and the other engineer ran the rest of it. And then you had two pusher engines, so you had to have an engineer and a fireman, and probably a brakeman and a conductor on those. And then you had your supervisory personnel and then maintenance of way people on the plow. So this is probably the payroll of a double rotary plow. And I don't recognize any of the people here, but this guy has a kind of a unique sweater that shows up in another photo. And this is, I wanted to also mention on one of the copies of this photo, written on the back of it, like I say, I don't have any identification of these guys, but they wrote on there of this crew, the first 7 to pass on, 4 of them died in wrecks. 1 was a suicide. 1 was hung for his wife's murder, and 1 died of natural causes. But I don't know which is which. And here we see another double rotary up at Laconia. And now this is more traditional. It has a mallee on here for the pusher. These plows were not self-propelled. They had to be pushed by a locomotive. And then we see the mallee is an oil burner. And the plow still has to have the canvas tarp on the tender. And here's what the plow would look like after a full night of plowing snow up there. And here's another double rotary plow, and this is the 1913. So this is the crew that fought the biggest snowstorm they ever had up on the Highline. The only ones I can identify is this is R.W.L. Benjamin. He was a brakeman. And then over here we got Casper Cap Brenner. And he was a conductor up here, but he figured quite prominently in snow service up here every winter. And then R.R. Gardner, conductor, and O.S. Brown was a brakeman up here. And that's the only faces I can pick out up here. And this is the 1914 plow crew. And here we see the guy with the sweater again. That must be his annual winter togs. And I don't recognize any faces in here either. But this guy looks like a train master, probably smoking a cigar and trying to look important. And they like to pose with the plow. Everybody did. This plow though, I wanted to draw attention to the cutting wings up here. In 1912, the Milwaukee modified these plows and put a larger cutting wing on the cutting shroud. And so that increased the cutting width from 11 feet 9 inches to 13 feet 6 inches. And they were held in place by 3 big strong hinges and then in position by pins and brackets. And the reason for that was that they had some 10-degree curves up here. And if you had a pasture train following the plow with the old cutting width, when you try to go around a 10-degree curve, the pasture cars would be rubbing up against the snowbank. So this increased width gave them a little breathing room. And like I say, everybody likes to get their picture taken with the plow. And here we're plowing out the passing tracks at Laconia. And there's the unloading shed again. And you can see the stack of the covered turntable in the background. And here's a bunch of guys that were usually up here every winter for snow service. And these I can identify. You can see the caboose has a good 4 feet of insulation up here to hold the heat in. And this guy is O.S. Brown, brakeman, and R.R. Gardner again, the conductor. And then this guy is William Ennis, Bill Ennis. And he was number 1 seniority conductor. He had a conductor's date of March 6, 1908, and or I mean March 16th, 1908, excuse me. And so he would have hired out on the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway of Washington was the company at that time. But up here, he is the assistant train master, which carried the nickname Snow King. And so he was in charge of the snow district up here. And he called the shots on the rotaries, where they were going to go and when, and was basically in charge of the whole snow district. And then this is Casper Cap Brenner, another conductor. Like I say, he was pretty prominent in snow removal service up here every winter. And then this is brakeman R.W.L. Benjamin. And then if you'll notice over brakeman Brown's shoulder is a gondola attached to the caboose. We know what that's for, don't we, boys and girls? Now here we see a rotary in operation. And you notice there's a couple guys up on the roof of it. That was kind of standard practice. You had 2 engineers in there, but neither one of them could see hardly anything when the plow was in operation. So they generally had to have a spotter either up on the roof or hanging out the side to let the engineers know what they were up against. And here we see another plow throwing snow off the right of way down the embankment. This is in the winter of 1913. And here we are again plowing out the Laconia yards. I would suspect these guys in the long coats are probably officials that are up here supervising things and wondering why their trains aren't running on schedule. And here we are plowing. Here's a guy hanging out the side here. That's probably the fireman back there. And here's a rotary sitting in front of the Laconia depot. And I can pretty much guarantee that that wheel is not spinning as fast as it appears in the picture. With the old slow film they had in those days, that wheel's probably just barely loping along, but it looks like it's doing 90 miles an hour. And there's your caboose with the 4 feet of snow on the roof. And then these mounds here are flat cars that are in the passing track buried in the snow. And this is the helper from Cedar Falls, the 2509 again. And looks like they bucked through a slide on the way up. And this is over in Rockdale, and it's labeled 30 feet of snow, Rockdale, CM and PS Railway. So they're plowing through a 30-foot deep cut of snow. And again, I don't recognize anybody in the picture, but this guy here is wearing what they used to call a 1,000-miler shirt that was usually worn by boomer trainmen. And I know 100 miles is a day's pay, so I'm assuming that you can wear that shirt for 10 trips before you have to launder it. And here we see that they're getting ahead of the winter here. They got the tracks cleaned out right down to the ties there, so they don't have to shovel switches out every time they throw one. And there they are plowing out the yards again, the water tank spout there. And going past the Laconia depot. And here's another plow after a night of work. Still got his marker lamps up. Now, this was a accident that happened in January 1913. You had time freight number 64 was climbing the grade and had an avalanche come down on him about a mile west of Laconia. And it trapped him in there. And so they sent a crew up here and a rotary plow. And the rotary plow ended up getting stuck in here too. And this crew worked for 3 days to dig this terrain out of this avalanche trap. And they just about had it free when another avalanche came down and knocked 2 locomotives and 12 cars of expensive Oriental imports down into the Snoqualmie River at the bottom of the grade. And Roadmaster G.P. Hall, although he recovered, was seriously injured. He got caught in that slide. And here we are plowing out another cut. And you can see the lookout hanging out the side here. And another view of Laconia buried in snow. You had to get used to snow up here because it snowed 7 months out of the year. And in addition to the rotary plows, they had a cut widener. And they had 50 men with that cut widener that were shovelers and stuff to dig trees out. They got their power here is a K1 class Prairie number 5556. But a cut widener is a flat car with a control cabin on it and 2 big steel wings that can reach out beyond where the plows could reach and make a wider cut so that if a train had to stop, there was room for the brakeman to walk alongside of the train. And these steel wings would reach out and pull the snow in and then deposit it between the rails behind it. And then they just run a rotary up there and pick that up and throw it off the road. And this picture was taken in Rockdale because that's back mountain in the back there. And this is a washed out aerial photo of Snoqualmie Summit, but this is where the Highline ran right down this highway here and then cut across here, went up what is known as Alpental Road. And then this is that loop up there. It's through here, comes down. Now this is known as Guy Cabin, and it's owned by the Washington Alpine Club. And they own this property here. So if you want to hike this old grade, it's best to ask permission. And every time I've ever been up there, there's always been at least one person at the cabin. But they're pretty proud of their little piece of Milwaukee history, so they're willing to let you go explore it. They've never denied me to go up and look at it. They have their own bridge across the South Fork of the Snoqualmie River up here. But if you look over the side, you'll see big timbers in the bottom of the banks there where there was part of the Milwaukee Bridge. And then through this part here, there's still ties on the ground that are covered with moss. And then they had another bridge over the Snoqualmie River here. And when I was down there was a huge concrete block on the bank there that was part of the Milwaukee Bridge. And then just beyond is a waterfall here. And then Craig Magnuson, he took the Laconia map and overlaid it onto a Google Earth image. And so here's the east switch of Laconia. And then here's that wagon road. And then we got the depot and the water tank. And then over here's the engineman's bunkhouse and Holden's Hotel. And then over here's the engine facilities. And then your west switch. And then as you can see, the grade went right up Alpental Road and across Commonwealth Creek, and then swung over here and crossed the Snoqualmie 2 times, and then went over the I-90 and then swung over to this side of I-90 for the rest of the climb to Rockdale. And Craig Magnuson also put this together, and him and I agreed that this was the most likely location for the Laconia Depot, which was in the old westbound lanes of what used to be the Sunset Highway. So it's right across from Bob's Espresso. And then here's the Traveler's Rest and the Red Mountain Coffee Company. And they shifted the westbound, or they shifted from the westbound lanes over here when they cut the grade down for an underpass for an exit to the freeway. So that's our best guess as to where the Laconia Depot sat. And this is Laconia westbound looking at Guy Peak and Snoqualmie Mountain. And there's Denny Mountain. And we're heading out of Laconia now. This one, I'm sure, is the winter of 1912, 1913, because all the snow accumulation on the wires knocked out their communication. And they actually used a spark gap transmitter or something like that to put out train orders and stuff up here because the lines were down. And it actually worked pretty well. There were a couple of newspaper articles written about that. And on down. Now this is a bridge FF 56 over the South Fork of the Snoqualmie River, and this is that second crossing where I saw the concrete block from. And this is just a colorized postcard that was made. This is the same bridge in the winter. You wouldn't even know there was a river down there. And then here it is again, bridge FF 56, and here's that waterfall. And the concrete block was over on this bank somewhere. And then here we see the Sunset Highway. Now, the Sunset Highway and the Milwaukee Road were never in operation at the same time. By the time they completed the Sunset Highway, Milwaukee Road had picked up all their rails and removed their structures up here and abandoned the Highline. In fact, further up at Laconia, the Sunset Highway ran right down the Milwaukee Road's grade. And this is descending the Highline, showing how the grade was pretty much just cut out of a shelf on the mountainside. This is at bridge FF 66, and we're looking at down at Rockdale. You can see the buildings there at Rockdale. And this is a colorized postcard again, and it's got the green cars, but this is a publicity photo of the Olympian making the climb to up the west side of the Highline. And then we see the train moved a little further up the line. We can see that he was sitting on a little bridge. That's bridge FF 64. And this bridge is over the creek that ran down from Lodge Lake. And this area is accessible from a trail off of the Pacific Crest Trail. So that portion of the grade is still intact up there. And then they had to come in and electrify it. And look at how close that trolley pole is to the ties. The people on the observation car need to keep their head and arms inside at all times. And this is the Olympian descending the Highline on the west side, and it looks like they've been up here doing some shoveling. And then this is a Mally helper returning back to Cedar Falls with 9517. And he's just about to cross Bridge FF62 here. But this shows how precarious this line was, just hanging on the side of the cliff. And this is a little G6 class um, 10-wheeler. And it looks like he's got a business car. And he's descending the pass here. And he's about to cross Bridge FF78 in the foreground here. And behind him is Bridge FF76. And then this is a watchman's shack. And this was probably Sloggy's shack. Sloggy was a watchman up here that got written up about in the Milwaukee Roads Employee magazine back in 1913. And then you can see the water barrels on both ends of the bridge there for fire protection. And this is Bridge FF74, and illustrates how the roadbed was literally carved out of the shelf. And now we're down at Rockdale, and this is Bridge FF80, looking up the Highline. And you can see all the dirty stuff on the snow. Well, that's tunnel debris. They're in the process of boring the Snoqualmie Tunnel, and so the spoils were brought out here and dumped over the bank. You can see a narrow gauge railroad here with some little dump cars on it. And then it looks like the railroad's been moved over here and they're dumping stuff on this end too. Now this bridge here, this last span up here of this bridge is still intact up there, and it has two rails spiked down on it on ties. So there actually is a short piece of the Highline that's still intact to this day. And this is a little more detail of where they have like little temporary snow sheds there to keep the tracks open for dumping the debris. And then this is looking down the grade. There's the water tank at Rockdale, and the Rockdale depot is on the other side of it. And then this was a big boiler plant up here that provided the power for the drills, lighting for the tunnels, and hot and cold running water and whatever they needed up here. This thing ran night and day for 3 years. And then these big buildings up here were for the tunnel workers, the commissary and hotel, and whatever they needed was available to them up here. And then we see a steam shovel down here that's excavating the grade to the tunnel portal. And here's another view of it, the boiler plant there and the tunnel workers' buildings. We see another two-story section foreman's house. And in this case, it actually is the Rockdale section foreman's dwelling. And it looks like the Olympian has just come down off the Highline. Bridge FF80 again. And then here you can see all this clean new rock that's been brought out of the tunnel and dumped off from this narrow gauge railroad. And then here's a quick look at the tunnel being excavated. And here's your narrow gauge train coming out of there. And this is was known as Portal Creek, but prior to the tunnel, it was known as Rockdale Creek. And you can see it gets rather wild in the spring runoff. So this creek was channeled through concrete on a concrete snow shed that took it over here and then down over the side of the hill down to the Snoqualmie River. And but there was also a reservoir built up here in the creek that supplied water to the standpipe and also water to the employees that worked there. And Rockdale was another helper point. So here we see our old friend, the 5018, awaiting helper duty, and Humpback Mountain in the background there. And here's the Rockdale Depot. And this is Agent William T. Leamy standing by the train order signal, and he's got black sleeve bands on to protect his white shirt from train order carbons. And his wife Josie was up here, and I'm guessing that she's the one in the middle, but I really don't know that. But they're sitting on FF bridge marker plates that have been dropped off up here, but they haven't been distributed yet. And I can see the water closet for the depot here, and then I see Josie's got her laundry hanging out to dry. And I can tell this is a warm day because they got the window open to the waiting room and partly open to the back bedroom there. And then I see this pipe here, and I'm wondering if they had running water. The water tank was right next door here, and so I'm wondering if they channeled water to them. And here's the depot again. The tunnel portal is right up in here. And another hot day I can see because the men are all sitting in the shade of the cars. You got one guy over there sleeping against the depot. But I can tell it's hot too because they got the bay window partly open here, which is a trick I used to do when on hot evenings. I'd open the windows on each end of the bay. You had to weigh your paperwork down or you'd be picking it up off the floor. And then some section laborer's wife has got her laundry hanging up here. And this photo was made by Harry Pope, who lived clear over in Revere, Washington, over in eastern Washington. And here we see William T. Leamy, the agent here, and his wife Josie. And I can tell this is an early photo because the depot is all in a solid color. And I believe this is a green primer that they would put on the depots before they applied the orange and maroon linseed oil paint. And so that tells me this is a very early photo. And this is probably when they first arrived here. This couple was married only about 2 or 3 months earlier in Butte, Montana, and then they came west out here. And he was the agent and day operator, and she was the night operator. And later he bid in a job down at Tacoma Junction, but she stayed up here for a while after that, and she actually worked in the interlocking tower. When the tunnel was completed, they built an interlocking tower up here, an 8-lever tower, and she worked up there pulling levers. So I want to acknowledge a few things here. One thing I want to address is why they abandoned the Highline, because it was an expensive piece of railroad to operate, even whether it was summer or winter. They claimed to run 16 trains a day up here, 10 freight trains and 6 passengers. And the tunnel line was going to lower the summit by 443 feet. It would eliminate 1,239 degrees of curvature and shorten the route by 4.4 miles. And the Highline was going to require 6,600 feet of snow shed up here eventually, and that was going to cost $50 a foot. So that was a $330,000 initial outlay. And then the yearly upkeep of those snow sheds, they figured was going to run $19,800. So the Highline yearly expenses was $165,000, and the helper service alone was $90,000. So the $2 million that Milwaukee spent to build the Snoqualmie Tunnel, they looked at it as money well spent. And I also want to acknowledge that most of the photographs that you saw up here was due to three photographers. Ashel Curtis, who you're probably all familiar with, a guy by the long name of Alexander Joseph Michael Holzman, who lived in Snoqualmie, took an awful lot of these photos up here. And then Louis Sheldry, who was a Norwegian that lived out near Ragnar, took a lot of photos. In fact, the trains had a standing order that if they saw Louis flagging them down at any point, they were to stop and pick him up and drop him off at any point he wanted to get off of a train from. And it'd be interesting to know what happened to those two guys' photo collections, because I have an awful lot of their photos, but I'm sure that they both took a lot more photos that I've never seen before. I also wanted to give a shout out to Craig Magnuson. If you're interested in the Snoqualmie Highline, he has a wonderful site called The History of Laconia, Snoqualmie Pass, Washington. And he gets more into the history, especially of the Summit Inn, than I cover in this program. Chuck Woods' book, Milwaukee Road West, made the statement that the station facilities of Laconia was later converted into the Summit Inn, but that's not true. It was actually the Milwaukee Road Beanery up there, Holden's Hotel, and the Milwaukee Road Engineman's Bunkhouse. J. Paul Holden bought those two buildings from the Milwaukee and then turned them into the original Summit Inn up there. And later, J. Paul Holden owned a tavern down in Falls City, Washington. And so he would have been an interesting guy to have a conversation with on a bar stool. And I also wanted to say that I wrote an article on the Highline that was published in the MRHA TMR, the Milwaukee Railroader, and that article appeared in the third quarter of the 2011 issue. And so that concludes my program, and I hope all of you people enjoyed it. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Alan. That was a really, really interesting program. I didn't know anything about this previously, and now I know quite a bit more. So I know I've got a few questions for you. So how did you figure out who was who in these pictures?
The way I knew that is I showed pictures of this engineer up there, John Bain. I used to correspond with his son, George Bain, who was retired, and we used to write letters back and forth. And whenever they had photographers up there taking pictures, then John Bain would purchase two copies of whatever they were photographing, and he would give one to each of his two sons. So George had quite an album full of early day photos up there, and then he rode with his dad up on the helpers lots of times, and he even relieved up at Laconia on the Hostler job up there. So he knew all about the operations, and so he told me about a bunch of that stuff, and then he identified a lot of those people in the photographs. So that's how I knew that.
I've got one question here.
Go, Robert.
Are you able to share screen at all? Can I share screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. While you were doing your presentation, I was looking on aerial maps, and this is the
Oops.
this is the LiDAR for. You guys can see that at all?
Not yet, but you're getting there. There you
There
go.
we go.
Okay. So this is a LiDAR of Rockdale. You see my mouse here.
Yep.
Okay. It shows where the tunnel goes in and goes across. So what you're saying is where that trestle was right here on that corner, and where they had a power plant was at Rockdale.
Yeah, it was the trestle across Portal Creek.
Okay, so that's Portal Creek that runs through there.
Yep.
Okay. And on DNR LiDAR, it shows the Highline pretty well through here.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it's
uh,
pretty
I hiked
massive.
some of that grade many years ago, but there's a
So,
point there. If you drop back down a ways, there's a point there where yeah, and right in there, the state dynamited all that hillside off of there when they took out remember there used to be a concrete snow shed going up that side of the pass.
Yeah,
They
I don't
wanted to
remember.
eliminate that snow shed, so they dynamited a whole bunch of the mountainside off of there so that if they had avalanches there, they would never reach the highway. And I tried to cross that. I dug my fingers into the side of the wall and walked along that thing and until I got to the other side of it. Well, then there was no grade there. There was like a 75-foot deep gully that I couldn't get across. And so now I was stuck there and I was stuck on that rock until evening. Finally, a state patrol stopped down there and he tried to get up there to help me and he couldn't even walk on that stuff. He was falling and they ended up having to get a search and rescue crew out of Seattle to come get me off that rock.
Everything
that
for
wouldn't
railroad
happen to
history,
me. I'm
right?
So if,
afraid of
if,
heights.
if they hadn't have seen me at the last minute, I was going into hypothermia by that time too. So my bones would still be laying up there on that rock if they hadn't have come. But
So this is the 10-degree curve up here through Commonwealth Creek, right?
yep, yep,
So it looks like there's a wide spot there, and then it looks like it was cut into the hillside a little bit, and that's where it basically went right under I-90.
yeah,
Picked up down here too, and then probably crossed wherever the I-90 is now.
right.
So it
And then,
more or less followed the eastbound lanes
correct?
Well, yeah, but it was up above
So
it.
up above it. Okay, got it.
Tony would have been here, and the ski bowl would have been in the same area,
That's a little further east, I thought.
that further
Mm,
east. Okay. But then down here, the other point where the line comes back in, this is Hyack. So coming out of the tunnel at Hyack. I'm noticing over here, is this the old line? Old High Line?
yeah, that probably is. That might be the drivable part where that big rock is.
Okay.
Oh,
So the
okay.
big rock would be right in here somewhere.
Yeah. And I don't know if that big rock is still around there. I didn't get that photograph until I was too disabled to go up there and do any more exploring. So,
So this line looks like it runs down into the river valley. So this would have been, where would the snow shed have been on the line?
mm,
Or Keechelus.
Keechelus? Would
well,
that be
maybe,
along the
Keechelus.
lake?
yeah, maybe further south there it was right on the shore of the lake. So,
Okay, so it's further down here. Okay.
yeah, down in that area someplace.
So by then the High Line had not taken off yet. It was still the main line.
No, the High Line took off right at the Keechelus station.
Okay.
And that snow shed was basically at just beyond the west or east switch at Keechelus.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
I had a bunch of questions and comments. I noticed you mentioned Alpental, and when my folks went to work for Ben Cheney at his estate in northeast Tacoma, uh, just about a month before I went into service, we drove up to Alpental where he had a big ski lodge and chalet, and they let me drive their car up there through that snowy weather. They had a great big Mercury, like a Ford Country Square wagon, but like that. And so we got to go up there, and then a couple other things. I noticed how clear those photographs are, and I know they're from large negatives, but still the clarity is pretty good when you zoom in and show us the nameplates like FF68 or whatever it is. Everything's really clear, and the locomotive numbers and things like that.
Yeah, I scanned a lot of those at high resolution to try to keep those details in.
Yeah, it looked good. Um, so was compared to what a little highway is next to the freeway at Summit, is Laconia Depot, was that and all that, was that more at the East Summit exit?
Yeah, I think so. Down
Okay,
there where the Travelers Rest is. I
yeah.
think that building's still standing up there.
And then there's a restaurant and a motel on West Summit. Is that
Yeah,
it? Uh-huh. And I'm trying to remember, um, so the newer Snoqualmie ski facility, that's kind of like between those two, right?
yeah, I believe so.
Look up on the hillside.
Yeah.
And yeah.
The old Milwaukee ski bowl was right across the High Line there. The High Line ran right through it. In fact, the ski jump that they had up there was built on the High Line.
Oh, okay.
They didn't like do
Thank you.
ski jumps over the tracks or anything, did they? Yeah, this is interesting. And how long and where did you find all these pictures?
Well, a lot of them I got from George Bain, and then other ones I've been collecting over the years, just wherever I can find them. And like I say, those two guys took a lot of pictures up there, and I'm sure I haven't even seen all of them.
Where did the
But
grade start dropping off going west out of Laconia? Was it at the horseshoe curve, or was it beyond there? It started dropping down.
oh, right at the depot. The depot was right on the summit, and so the descending grade was right there at that water tank at Laconia.
So what was the grade from Laconia down to Rockdale?
2.75%.
Ooh. Yeah, George,
But you know,
quarries doesn't like that.
The Milwaukee actually could have got away from not having to do the tunnel because they really only just had some adverse grades. The grade on the other side at Keechelus was 2.2%. Well, that's the same as the grade going up Beverly Hills. So,
Or Stevens Pass. So I mean it's a
yeah,
mountain grade, but
but
Yeah,
uh,
and
but
on
they but they really escaped the bullet because they got the tunnel open in 1915. And the following year was the big snow of 1916, and they had enough troubles down on the lower elevation. They can't imagine how bad it would have been up there on the High Line.
So, what was their daily train count on the High Line at
They
its?
they claim 16 trains a day, 10 freight and six passengers. I can account for the six passengers and about six of the uh, freight trains, three in each direction in the timetable. So they must have been running some extra freights that weren't scheduled.
And everything
yeah.
got helpers, so that added to more movements back and forth.
Yeah,
So they either ran extra sections or they just ran extras.
yeah.
So yeah. Um, I had a question for you about Bandera. So there's in this joint timetable 3, it shows Bandera on there, and then it doesn't show Rockdale on there, but they, of course, they had the microphone at Rockdale to tell the dispatchers how the progress was of any eastbound or westbound.
Yeah, what they call the snapper. Yeah.
Yeah,
And yeah, Rockdale was I think abandoned oh sometime in the 1950s, I believe. They had two big passing tracks there at Rockdale originally. It was a pretty good place for meeting trains, but they ended up taking everything out of there except the main line.
yeah.
Did the grade lessen to 2-2 below Rockdale?
What was that?
Did the grade lessen to 2-2 below Rockdale?
Yeah, from Cedar Falls up to Rockdale, it was 1.75%.
And then why the reason for the two portals at the west portal?
Because that was basically it was a concrete snow shed and it carried that stream well away from the railroad grade. And that second portal was they had a spur in there in the early days, and they used to keep some kind of a piece of machinery in there. I've got a photo that you can see something in there, but I can't identify what it is. And then in later years, they used to keep a bulldozer up there for uh, moving snow, and they used to park the bulldozer under that. And if you look at that second portal, it's got embedded in the concrete. It's got um, steel like reinforcing rods like they put in concrete. They got them in there bent so that they can put these heavy timbers in there and literally seal up the whole side of that thing so that when snow comes down off of that hill, it wouldn't come inside the portal. So they could close that thing up tight every winter when they wanted to.
I
And
went
But
with,
but it was not never planned to be a double track. I've seen that in several publications where they specify that the Milwaukee was going to double track their tunnel. And it's like they had a single track line, so why would they spend the money to double track a tunnel?
Tunnel.
You usually
Yeah.
have double track coming up to both sides of the tunnel, and then you have a single track for the tunnel, but you don't have a double track tunnel and then a single track main line.
well, they never really had the traffic capacity there either,
No.
so they didn't really need to. Um, I went up on Hanson Creek one time, kind of like that Blair Koistra perspective there with Don Lair, and that was a pretty good time. We photographed a couple trains up there, but I think they were either at, I don't know if it was a dead freight east, but it had chip cars and some other stuff, so maybe it was like a 202 or whenever that ran. I know 200 ran it out of Tacoma around 8 p.m., but you know, but I don't know about 202.
Yeah.
Yeah, one last question. Speaking of Blair's photos, I've seen on his before. It shows a picture on the east portal of them using block and tackle to tie the doors open or closed. What was
Yeah.
that all?
Well, when the wind was blowing, it created a vacuum in the tunnel there, and so they had to use this pulley system to close the doors so that the two doors would close it at equal distance there. Otherwise, if you tried to shut one door and not the other one, it could pull the door right off the hinges. Another problem is they had to have those doors open when a train going eastbound entered the west portal because the train going in there is like a piston and a cylinder, and so it's pushing the air ahead of it. And so they had a light at Rockdale there showing if the tunnel doors were closed, and if that light was on, then trains would have to stop there and call the train dispatcher and let them know that they couldn't go in the tunnel yet, and then they'd have some section guy come down there and open it up for them. Otherwise, they'd blow the doors right off the hinges
Oh,
trying to go
Was
through
Jeff
the tunnel.
was Jeff Jensen one of those guys?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
thought so.
a guy I went to, well, he was a couple grades ahead of me in school, but I found out just recently that he worked up there one winter doing the door on the tunnel. So
Uh, I had a question about in this Wheels Rolling West book by Dave Stife and Ted Benson. The first photograph that's in there is of the Kent Depot. So this is a little off subject, but it shows one of the eastbounds in the fog. I was wondering if you ever saw that photograph because you worked Kent Depot, didn't you?
yeah, I finished up on the Milwaukee at Kent, but no, I never saw that photo.
Okay,
yeah. We could do a whole program on the Kent Depot, you know.
yeah, really. Yeah, go get your teeth fixed there, right?
Yeah, you do a whole program on Sam Belcher.
Oh,
So here's
that was the agent?
Yeah.
so here's the photo.
Is that
Is
Oh
you?
that
yeah,
is that
Is that
Ted
you?
Pope?
probably is. Yeah, probably.
Uh, you guys know who Ted Pope is?
Alan, you do,
I
don't you?
just I just talked to him the other day. In fact, I was in the middle of re-recording my program, and he called me, and the damn phone went off, and I had it wrapped up in a towel in the drawer. I thought it would be quiet, but it picked up on on the video, and I had sent Ted a link to that Cherry Valley video, and he was calling me, telling me how wonderful that video was and how great he thought it was.
And that Great Northern Cherry Valley line is already on YouTube. If you just Google YouTube
Yep.
Cherry Valley Great Northern, you'll find that excellent program that we recorded exactly 1 week ago today. So, Alan, another great program, and I want to thank you for just the tremendous amount of effort that you put into creating this. Just an insight into an area, just like the program last week, an area that people just don't really know much about. And again, a very short-lived chunk of track that has now been preserved for history. So, and I also want to thank our audience, the bishops, as I call them, George Foster and Robert W. Scott, two of my dear friends, and of course, Alan, my dear friend. And so at this point, if I hear nothing more from the audience, I'm going to say that we're going to end the recording. So I want to thank all of our guests that were here today and all of the guests that will be watching our program in the future on YouTube. And we're going to put this program both on my YouTube channel and on the Cascade Rail Foundation YouTube channel. So you'll be able to watch this again in the future. And I want to thank our special guest, Alan Miller, for an outstanding presentation. And for those of you that are gluttons for punishment, remember tomorrow we will have Gordon Glattenberg on the PNRA/Cascade Rail Foundation biweekly Zoom program, doing a program on steam south of the borders, plural. So we'll be looking at Mexico, Guatemala, Central America, and all sorts of color photography that Gordon took in the early 1960s. Alan, thank you. And I am, as soon as I get my mouse to work here, going to end our recording. Thanks everybody for being here, and thanks everybody in the future that watches this program.